For just under $70, there are not a lot of decent used GPUs with enough VRAM that you can pick from, and if you're on a tight budget, this card is easily the best option for its price. The RX 580 is a 7-year-old card at this point, and while that number might discourage you from buying it, just wait until you see how it performs. This RX 580 is an 8GB model with a 256-bit memory bus and 2304 stream processors. One thing to watch out for when buying these is the stream processor count. There are plenty of models with just 2048 SPs out there which deliver lower performance, so make sure to do your research or ask the seller before buying one. Another thing to keep in mind is that depending on how recent your computer is, you might need to switch the boot mode from UEFI to CSM with this card, because otherwise you might experience graphical issues or not boot at all. Since my computer is relatively modern, that's what I had to do with my AM4 setup, although I did pair this card with a 4th gen Intel system, where it booted right away with default BIOS settings. Anyways, for the specs, we have a Ryzen 5 5600, a B450 Tomahawk motherboard, 32GB of 3200 megatransfer memory, and a 700-watt power supply. Latest drivers were used at the time of testing. The power limit has been maxed out in MSI Afterburner, though keep in mind that depending on the card, increasing this setting might result in crashing, so you might want to leave it at 0 or play around with it until you find a sweet spot. Smart access memory isn't available here, so that was disabled, and finally the power plan was set to ultimate performance. Oh, and keep in mind that I'm using Relive to record the footage, which can affect performance from just a couple of percent up to about 15% at worst, depending on the title, meaning without recording, performance is going to be higher in some games. Kicking things off, we have Apex Legends, which runs surprisingly well using the lowest settings, with textures set to high. Generally, the frame rate stays well above 90s, and while it does drop below 60 FPS in taxing situations, the game is totally playable most of the time.
Reloading. Enemy down. Getting your shot. Reloading.
Unfortunately, we're not allowed to enable the performance overlay anymore in Battlefield 2042, but I still decided to test it with an FPS counter at the top left corner, and the game ran surprisingly well. The frame rate mostly hovers between 80s to 90s, with drops to low 70s under intensive scenarios. Performance will vary depending on the map, game mode, and player count, though I'm pretty sure that you'll be fine in most cases. The RX 580 does struggle a bit in the latest Warzone. The frame rate tends to drop below 60s in detailed areas, and you do get frequent frame time spikes. Basically, the game does run, it just doesn't look like you're going to have a great experience playing it, unless maybe you try lowering the resolution or enabling upscaling. Cyberpunk doesn't run too bad with this card using low to medium settings. We're getting between 45 to 55 FPS, and since this is a single player title, I found that frame rate to be enough here. Dying Light 2 runs pretty good using the lowest preset. I'm still not happy with the input lag we're getting once you drop below about 80 frames in this game, but once again, given this is a single player title and assuming you're coming from an even worse GPU, I think 50s to 60s is a totally playable frame rate.
Bye, have a great time.
Forza Horizon 5 runs extremely well even on a 20-year-old toaster, so it should be no surprise that our RX 580 performs great here using medium settings, and I don't think you're ever going to see drops below 70 FPS. The 8GB RX 580 has no issues running God of War either using the lowest preset. After 20 minutes of testing, I don't think I ever saw a dip below 60 frames. I was surprised to see this card have no issues running Hogwarts Legacy using the lowest preset. I honestly expected the frame rate to be much lower, but here we can see that we're getting a pretty playable experience of about 50 to 60 frames, even running around a demanding location such as Hogsmeade. For our last game we have Spider-Man Remastered, which you will also be able to enjoy with this card using the lowest preset. The frame rate can jump around a bit in some situations, but I don't think it would be a problem for most of you, once again, especially considering you're coming from an even older GPU. When it comes to thermals, this MSI Armor model does not exceed 68 degrees Celsius under full load in a 20-degree room, with the fan speed set to just 50%, which is a good result. Finally, we have the power consumption, and under full load, the total system power consumption barely exceeds 300 watts, so a 450 to 500 watt power supply is the minimum you want to have here. Whenever I recommended this card in my videos, I frequently got replies from people claiming that it's weak and I shouldn't be recommending it, but it is important to keep in mind that there are people out there who have a budget limit and don't have the luxury to even add an extra dime to it. Sure, the RX 580 is basically the bare minimum you want to have nowadays, but hey, as we saw, it still has some life in it and can run a lot of relatively up-to-date titles without any issues. Like I mentioned in the beginning, at this price it is hard to find a GPU that performs this good that also comes with 8GB of VRAM. The closest alternative is the GTX 1066GB, which also held up really well, though it generally costs a little more and has less VRAM. In conclusion, I think the 8GB RX 580 is a great card to go for if you're not looking forward to playing the latest and greatest games and have an extremely tight budget of up to $70, although you might still give some modern titles a shot if you're okay with a console-like experience and don't mind using upscaling or playing at a lower resolution. Anyways, that's been it. Thank you all for watching. Feel free to have a look at other videos on my channel. You can also find ways to support my work in the description down below. Be sure to leave a like, subscribe for more content, and I'll see y'all in the next one.